I would appreciate your time as I need to talk to you about a serious issue. Do you recall saying you had stuff to talk about when you got back home? Well, that time has come. I think it's time for us to get a divorce and split ways. Wait. Why the abrupt choice? It seems confusing and one-sided. It surprised me, especially amid my cervical cancer treatment, that you were demanding a divorce. Despite the explanation you gave, it didn't feel justified. You said you were in love with someone else and that person was better than me. You seem to be planning to move on to a 19 years old. Divorce is something I can accept. But it's more complicated than saying goodbye. Is it not possible for us to talk about this more before deciding? I get your viewpoint. But shouldn't we take a moment to think things through? It seems that our feelings won't change. Not even with conversations. Maybe it's best to move forward with the divorce and accept the inevitable. It's not just about love, can we really stay together without it? I'm trying to be calm. But your behavior seems hasty and egotistical. It's aggravating that you're treating me like a barrier to your newfound love. And that your excessive demand for a divorce is frustrating. I'm at my breaking point. And talking about it any further could backfire. Moreover, your comments regarding my infertility were humiliating. Particularly in light of the surgery I had to have for cervical cancer. It is insulting to imply that a woman's infertility makes her unworthy. Making threats to get married again to a younger woman will only make things worse. It was best to keep those words to yourself. It was then that I made a choice. I decided not to argue any longer and quickly departed. Maybe you wouldn't be feeling so much regret right now if you had handled the matter more sensibly. I got a call from the hospital about you 3 days after I left, indicating that our divorce was still pending. I reluctantly went to the hospital, where I saw my spouse sitting there with a pale, motionless face. I'm so glad you're here, he muttered feebly. What took place? Is everything in order? I asked, worry tinged in my voice. My spouse fell to his knees out of nowhere. It felt like I was witnessing divine vengeance. Permit me to introduce myself. I'm a 27-year-old office worker named Megan. It has been nearly a whole year since Kevin and I got married last year. Kevin works at a nearby supermarket, where we first met 3 years ago. He oversees the produce department. I wasn't exactly impressed with him at first. Dinner ideas crossed my head after a demanding workday. What should I make for dinner tonight? Maybe just some inexpensive veggies in a stir-fry. I thought weary. I was so familiar with the layout of my favorite grocery store that I quickly headed for the typical low-cost vegetables, such carrots and beans. But a sign touting cabbage that cost only 9 cents per head diverted my attention. That's quite a deal, I said to myself, considering how much food was excessive for someone who eats by themselves. A voice shocked me from behind before I could make up my mind. It was Kevin, going into a long-winded monologue about the health advantages of cabbage like a seasoned clothes salesperson. Perplexed, I gave in, putting a cabbage in my basket and leaving the area quickly. Kevin started recommending vegetables to me every time we saw each other at the store after that day. Over time, our conversations progressed from lighthearted repartee about his career and personal life to inquiring about mine. When he finally plucked up the guts, he invited her out for dinner. I agreed to go out to dinner with him even though I wasn't sure whether his advances were proper. If only out of curiosity. At first, I thought Kevin's approaches were pointless. But after our first supper together, I saw a surprisingly compassionate and genuine side of him. My view of him changed dramatically, and I started to feel more and more attracted to him, which ultimately resulted in our relationship. I kept wondering why he had approached me in the first place as we got to know each other better. Kevin said. It was love at first sight. When I eventually brought up the subject. As soon as I saw you in the grocery store, I knew I had to talk to you if I got the chance. I couldn't stand to think that our responsibilities as employees and customers prevented me from acting. That's when it hit me. Kevin wasn't being frivolous, he was motivated by a deep love. He loses all sense of reality and becomes completely concentrated on the person he is in love with. Our union last year was the result of our romance blossoming. Now, as we consider beginning a family, a momentous event upended our world. When I was having pain in the restroom one day, I thought it was just a normal period cramp. But the unusual blood volume, irregular bleeding outside of my period, and blood in my urine gave me cause for concern. Kevin asked how I was doing, concern on his face, and recommended eating more spinach and prunes to boost my iron levels. However, I felt in my heart that it went beyond diet. A biting uneasiness came in while the agony continued, requiring numerous excursions to the restroom. I decided to get medical help since I felt like something was really wrong. I had assumed that I would never fall ill seriously, but I was shocked to receive a diagnosis that disproved my beliefs. The doctor's words reverberated. Cervical cancer. Leaving me feeling helpless and overwhelmed. I could never have imagined, at 27, falling into the world of cancer. It served as a sobering reminder that even the most gullible people, like myself, can become seriously ill. I had a sliver of hope when I left the doctor's office, and I slightly straightened my back. But the pressure of telling my husband weighed heavy on my shoulders, making me feel older than I actually was. The news of my cervical cancer clouded my head and made the meal seem gloomy when we sat down to eat that evening. The seriousness of the upcoming conversation made me less hungry, so I struggled to find the proper moment to taste the food. My spouse saw my discomfort and put down his cutlery, showing evident worry as he brought up the topic. It seems like you got your test results today. What was the outcome? His question made my heart race, and I had to tell him the frightening reality. I told him, I have cervical cancer. Anticipating his response, he was just as shocked as I was at first, and you could see him struggling to accept the truth of my diagnosis. But you're so young, he said, his disbelieving anxiety mixed with compassion. While he was asking questions regarding the course of treatment and what it would mean for us going forward, I tried to reassure him that although surgery was required, it wouldn't rule out being pregnant. The possibility of treatment and starting a family offered some hope despite the risks and uncertainty that came with it. I could feel the strain in the air when I described the complexity of the surgery and its after effects, upsetting the regularity of our dinnertime routine. When I tried to lighten the mood with a joke about operations and losses over dinner, I was met with resistance. I tried to quietly resume the meal after apologizing for my error, but our chat was still heavy on my mind. The threat of surgery hovered over our life in the days that followed, and eventually I was admitted to the hospital to have it done. My first estimate for the length of my hospital stay was 2 to 3 weeks. But this was only an estimate based on the specifics of the case. Discharge may take place sooner or may take up to a month. I was concerned about the possibility of having to stay in the hospital for a long time because it was my husband's health. I was concerned about his eating habits and reminded him to keep a balanced diet. But he argued that his diet was already well balanced and that mine was deficient in vegetables. In a similar vein, I stressed the value of being on time for work. But he jokingly brought up my propensity to sleep in. My concerns regarding his independence turned out to be unjustified. He was able to manage independently, which surprised me. I was anxious when I was admitted to the hospital because I was going to have my first major surgery. I couldn't sleep the first night. And the next day my spouse, sensing my anxiety, didn't want to talk about the upcoming surgery. In the meantime, new student employees in different departments started up a casual discussion. Though I couldn't remember everything because I didn't spend much time in the cashier area. Talks, even about everyday subjects, took on a new significance, especially with my spouse, providing a reassuring vestige of normalcy in the midst of the hospital setting. But as the day of the procedure drew nearer, my nervousness increased. Nurses' attempts to calm me progressively became jumbled in the midst of my growing anxiety. As soon as I walked into the operating room, I had a strong need to run away from the procedure that was about to happen. However, after entering the operating room and as time went on, I found myself unanticipatedly recovering from surgery. The precise amount of time was only a hazy memory due to anesthesia, but it was roughly 6 hours. The crippling worry I had before the procedure evaporated so quickly that I felt somewhat underwhelmed. After the procedure, I was so relieved that I couldn't wait to tell my husband about it. Nevertheless, I was perplexed and worried by his absence on the day of the procedure and the day after. My anxiety increased as days went by and my messages went unanswered. When I was starting to lose patience, my spouse showed up at the hospital. Although I could tell he was worried, his justification for not being there, balancing work and home duties, cooled my mounting annoyance. Even when he reassured me, I still felt like I was bothering him more. This insight increased my desire to get out of the hospital. But once more, his visits became irregular and my messages were not returned. My own frustrations mixed with worries about his well-being. And I confronted him about the lack of communication. My perplexity was only heightened by his reaction, in which he claimed to be unwell yet looking good. I was inquisitive and worried about what he wasn't saying because of his discomfort and fidgeting, which suggested underlying problems. I saw that my spouse was holding his lower body in and approached him openly about his pain. My first thought went to the worst-case scenario when he said he had a rash. Had he gotten sick while I was in the hospital? His guilty look only made me think more. And he hurriedly tried to assuage my fears by explaining that rashes were prevalent because of perspiration and humidity. My worries persisted despite his assurances. But I decided to put my faith in him anyway, even though I suggested getting confirmation from a doctor. His refusal to seek medical attention just made me more worried, especially because he thought that changing his diet would fix the problem. My insistence on getting medical help went against his embarrassment, which showed in his fidgeting and unwillingness to talk about it more. I trusted his opinion because I didn't know enough about men's health issues and decided not to pursue the matter. We didn't hear from him for another week until he showed up at the hospital right before I was released. I told the doctor that he was reluctant to get the rash checked out, seeing a chance for some light-hearted revenge. My husband's uneasiness at even the mention of the matter just made me more concerned, which in turn caused the doctor to become concerned and to discuss the appearance of the rash. The rash looked much like a normal sweat rash when it first appeared. But with time, it got worse, becoming more elevated and cauliflower-like in texture. This progression worried the doctor. Therefore, he insisted on a checkup right now. My spouse was reluctant to consent to a medical visit because he felt embarrassed. But he had little alternative because of the urgency of the matter. I couldn't help but feel a little embarrassed about bringing up the matter with the doctor. But my husband's misery was much worse. However, as we left the hospital, knowing that his health was being addressed seriously, I felt vindicated. After spending almost 3 weeks in the hospital, going home felt like a much-needed break. But the relief was fleeting. Sitting across from me at the table, my spouse dropped a bombshell. He desired a divorce. I was stunned and unable to speak as I tried to process how abrupt and serious his announcement had been. In the middle of my recuperation from surgery and continued care, my spouse disclosed that he had grown fond of a new cashier while I was in the hospital. He gave the justification that he waited until my discharge to inform me because he was worried it would hinder my recuperation. His disclosure was so unexpected and unilateral that I was left reeling from a storm of emotions. Even though he insisted he was innocent, the depth of his confession made me shudder and made me doubt the basis of our union. I now have a deeper affection for someone than I have for you. Please attempt to understand how this feels. I knew my husband was intense, especially when he was in love. But I never imagined it would last after marriage. His remarks made me feel dizzy. It was around the time of my illness that the new cashier started working. Do you mean to say that you had an affair with her? Is she to blame for your illness? I don't understand. Yes. I became interested in her, which is why I didn't go see her. But we haven't taken any action yet. We decided to hold off till after I had broken up with you. Nothing physical has been involved. My husband wasn't lying when he looked at me. His plan to continue dating after ours ended looked sensible. But it was also incredibly unjust. Though he may have idealized what he was doing, what he was really doing was trading up. This girl you're interested in. What's her name? Nicole. I take it she's a student. What is her age? 19. Was she the kind you liked? She just has a charming face. That's what drew me in. Not her features. Men's preferences appear to be simple, younger and more attractive is preferable. Viewed from a distance. I wonder if this direct and impassioned style has always been thus off-putting. I regret being so happy about my husband's intense affection in the past. If my husband continues to justify his dubious behavior as romantic, I'm ready to file for divorce. But getting a divorce isn't like terminating a romantic relationship. There's a lot to talk about. I can see your point of view. But shouldn't we talk about divorce later? Why not right now? No amount of conversation will make me feel differently. Let's concede and move through with the divorce. Divorce is not a decision to be made lightly. Thus it's not that easy. Can we really stay together as a relationship if there is no love? You're not thinking about hurting Nicole in any way, are you? It won't happen to me. Well, maybe at some point she ought to be included in the conversation. It appears that you have been compiling details about her, such as her name and age. His keen gaze did not waver. He appeared to believe that he was a hero of sorts, defending his beloved. It was infuriating how he treated me like a villain, impeding his ability to fall in love, and made an outrageous demand for a divorce. Every grating comment was making me want to throw my temper out of control. You mean that because of your cervical cancer surgery, you have an increased chance of complications? It is comparable to infertility. A non-fertile woman is considered unworthy. Nicole is a youthful, attractive woman with easy childbearing skills. I'll marry her. With such comments, he set himself a metaphorical landmine. They never ought to have been spoken. I decided to depart without thinking it through. Perhaps he wouldn't have regretted it so much later if he had been more sensible and tried to stop me. The divorce was filed 3 days after she left, and things were moving along nicely. A seamless resolution appeared to be imminent. But everything changed when the hospital called. I picked up, thinking it would be concerning my health, only to be ordered to head straight to the hospital because of my husband. The hospital had no idea that we were getting divorced. Since I hadn't answered the house phone, they probably called my cell phone. Reluctantly, even though I was still married, I went to the hospital. Here you are. All right. Something took place. My spouse sat there motionless, with no color left on his face. I felt a sinking sensation because I had been in similar circumstances before. There must have been a significant medical discovery. Does my husband have a serious illness? Indeed. He arrived because of a strange occurrence in his lower body. And as it happens, the doctor said, it looks like penile cancer. I turned my attention back from the doctor to my husband, who appeared even more stern than before, likely surprised that cancer was brought up once more. Is penile cancer, like cervical cancer, more common in younger people? I inquired. No. Guys over 60 are more likely to have it, compared to other malignancies. It is extremely uncommon. The likelihood is akin to winning $1 million in a casino. The doctor answered. It's highly unlikely to happen at such a young age. It's like being struck by lightning in a city full of skyscrapers. I see. Though I knew I shouldn't find the scenario funny. There was an involuntary smile on my face knowing my spouse had drawn such an unfortunate lot. Such a cancer is quite uncommon. What's the reason behind it? I asked. Although it's difficult to say for sure, the human papillomavirus is a common cause. The doctor clarified that the virus in question is also capable of causing cervical cancer. So, did I give my husband cancer? With anxiety, I inquired. No. That isn't always the case. Men can carry it as well as contract it through sexual intercourse. Thus, it's possible that you got it from your husband, or that you both got it on your own. The immune system usually deals with it without any problems. But occasionally it can result in cancer. The physician comforted. Can my husband's cancer be treated? I asked. The doctor said. Yes. It can be surgically removed. Just like your cervical cancer. I barely disguised my enjoyment when I turned to face my husband. Earlier, I was able to hide my laughter. But this time he noticed. He questioned. What are you laughing at? I apologize. Doctor. I couldn't help it. Does a removal imply a complete removal? I inquired. The doctor acknowledged. Given its progression, Partial removal is likely. What about having children? It won't affect the ability to have children, however. There might be some loss of reproductive function and changes in appearance, though we'll try our best to minimize them. The physician said. Go ahead and take it all out. I cut in sharply. What the hell is wrong with you? My husband, frustrated, attempted to face me on his feet, but he fell to his knees as his legs buckled from shock. He looked up from the floor, still ranting at me, but more angry than before. The doctor seemed perplexed by our conversation, not knowing that we were getting divorced. The doctor laughed, holding my stomach, and said nothing as my husband yelled at me. He was undoubtedly looking forward to spending time with the cute and youthful 19 years old. Therefore, he had planned to leave me for her. But now, his eagerness got the better of him at the most important portion. Furthermore, he mentioned that he now faced a risk to his reproductive system in addition to my higher chance of preterm birth and loss following my cervical cancer surgery. Doctor, we're getting divorced, so there's no need to contact me about my husband's illness anymore, I said with determination. All well. I'll see you later, the doctor answered. Be sure to pay attention to your treatment and pay attention to the doctor. After hearing this funny story, I felt satisfied and returned home. As long as the divorce could be completed as quickly as possible, I would be happy as could be. There was some conflict with the divorce, though. A week after learning of my husband's sickness, my phone rang once more. I answered the phone, thinking it was about the divorce. But it was about something else. Suddenly, my spouse begged. Please, let's pretend we never talked about divorce. What? Why now? Suddenly. Why now? When we've come this far? Perplexed, I asked. I told Nicole about my illness, and she ended our relationship, he regretfully admitted. I smiled again, glad that this conversation was taking place over the phone and that I would not be held accountable for my response. My husband was prone to being overly enamored with women, especially when they were 19 years old and impulsive. So I was partly expecting this to happen. They appeared to be compatible. But after hearing about his condition from my husband, Nicole regained her composure, just like I did when I eventually realized that his love was a mirage, given her youth and the plethora of opportunities that awaited her. Nicole's decision to leave him may have been simpler than mine. She voiced worries about her chances of getting married given the threat of disease. I mean, who would want to marry me with this illness? Even now, our divorce is pending. Given that we both have similar concerns about starting a family, can't we just start over and support one another? However, my spouse's reply was depressing. Aren't you just chasing any pretty young girl? The work is getting too hard. My involvement with Nicole and our approaching divorce are well known to everyone at the store. If you both go, I won't be able to face them. It's just too embarrassing. His indifference to my situation hurt. That's not my concern, I shot back, advising him to think about finding a new job if his current workplace was too demanding. You understand to just get in touch with me about the divorce. Hold on. Don't be so heartless, he begged. Take some time to reconsider. But I quickly canceled the phone since I didn't think the chat would be fruitful. Now that the issue was settled, I focused on getting supper ready, choosing to purchase at a different supermarket so that I wouldn't have to deal with my divorced spouse in public. After our divorce was eventually formalized, Nicole, who had also quit her job at the grocery, appeared out of thin air and went back to living her life as if nothing had happened. My previous husband stayed put in his comfortable, known environment at the grocery, unlike a student who may quickly change their surroundings. It seemed that Nicole had revealed their relationship specifics to their coworkers, leaving him to deal with the fallout from her leaving and our marriage's breakdown. It is conceivable that he will look for work elsewhere at some point. Nicole and her ex-husband terminated their marriage amicably, but my case necessitated a legal divorce that included apologies to our families. I told my ex-husband's parents everything, which deservedly stoked rage. The rumors made their way outside of his place of employment, which made our family members uncomfortable. As a result, he has been more and more alone. He will soon begin therapy for his sickness, which he brought upon himself. It is a scary prospect to face alone. I've finished my surgery and am now beginning the healing process. Even at 27, I have hope for the day when I find a meaningful relationship. I promise to put in a lot of effort in the interim. After watching the first story above, do you have any thoughts? Feel free to share your opinions in the comments section. Next, let's watch another similar story. David made a forceful declaration. I've decided it's best for us to end our marriage, and pushed a completed divorce application across the desk. I've observed a decrease in your effort and attractiveness since the birth of our baby. I'm done. I retaliated by holding my ground. I won't be intimidated by your comments. Get ready, because I'm going to demand payment, I declared. My answer was met with derision from David, who called me a greedy and inept father. My name is Jenny, and I'm a 30-something housewife and mother of James, who is in middle school. David became my mentor, which is how we first connected as coworkers at the same company, despite working together at the same location. When we've both progressed in our jobs, our communication has decreased over time. I'm now in charge of my own team, and I really like Susan, a colleague who is younger and has some amazing skills. Despite our different ages, Susan and I have become good friends through our shared lunches and sporadic after-work cocktails. David wasn't at dinner with me one evening, and I felt alone since I hadn't left work on time in a long time. It struck me when I was leaving the office that I had left my phone behind. Usually, I would have to wait for my husband, who frequently worked late, to bring it to me. Nevertheless, with no way to get in touch with anyone, I unwillingly went back to the workplace, even though it meant missing later trains. One of my coworkers, Phil, asked me why I was back. After I gave him the rundown, he gave me my husband's misplaced rail card and implied that David had already departed. I wondered why he was suddenly available after making this surprising revelation. I checked my phone for messages, but nothing was there. I assumed my husband might have had battery troubles because of his propensity to experience phone problems. I packed our misplaced possessions and headed home with that in mind. When I got home, I thought I would make dinner since I assumed David would return shortly. But as time went on and he was unable to be seen, worry began to grow. His absence continued after he'd cleaned up and finished dinner. I mentioned my concern in a tired moment. And James made a surprising remark about his father perhaps being unfaithful. Startled by what he said, I realized my son might be more intelligent than I had assumed. I unwillingly learned the specifics from James, who was unaware of the issue. At first, it confirmed my thoughts because Dad's actions lately resembled those of a student who had just begun dating. I thought it was simply another example of a guy becoming giddy over a new relationship. After considering James' disclosure, I started to reassess our situation. Our employment wasn't poisonous, but overtime was frequently required. I had disregarded my husband's signals of secrecy, blaming his late hours on work-related obligations. But sometimes, when he came back from these late shifts, I could smell something strange on his clothes. My suspicions were growing, and I knew that I had to face the truth, especially for James's sake. His reluctance to tell me the truth motivated me to act. I thanked him and decided to take matters into my own hands. I decided, quite bravely, to hire a detective agency. After some waiting, the inquiry verified my worst suspicions: my spouse was, in fact, having an affair. I couldn't believe it when I learned that his mistress was Suzanne, a coworker I had always thought of as friendly. The profound sting of her betrayal was the irony. An overwhelming feeling of rage and the need for retribution overcame me. I was thinking about taking revenge when my spouse spoke up out of the blue, throwing off my revenge plot. A sudden proposal of divorce was made by my husband, who works under me, while he was slamming a completed application on the desk. This was an unexpected turn of events. When it came to putting together the paperwork, it was clear that he had sought assistance. His arguments were as predictable as they were unpleasant. He blamed me for what he considered to be a decline in attractiveness and effort since the birth of our son. His remarks were painful, but I was determined not to let him see how upset I was. As an alternative, I did not back down and insisted on receiving just compensation. I was aware that if I accepted his requirements without any fight, it would only make him happy. Therefore, I purposefully provoked him, which resulted in his temperament becoming even more unpleasant. His allegations of greed and inability to raise our son on our own were met with indifference and were dismissed. I spoke forward and demanded that I be paid child support and other reparations. After expressing his obvious exasperation, he pressed me to sign the documents before storming out of the room, most likely to seek solace with Susan, his newly discovered confidant. As a result of his leaving, I was left feeling indifferent. He had turned into an unknown person. The next day, when I was at work, Susan came up to me with the same upbeat attitude that she always has. The moment she admitted that she had been having an affair with my husband. However, her veneer began to fall apart. Her tone of mockery, combined with the aroma of her perfume, only served to make the situation worse. It was obvious that she was trying to accomplish something, but I refrained from displaying my feelings because doing so would only serve her objective. I, on the other hand, kept my cool and responded by saying, I will not engage in such behavior, but I will be pursuing legal action against you. After that, David made the following observation: you appear to have a serious concern for money. Does it bother you to ask for money from a valued colleague like me? Not in the least. Why don't you concentrate on the things you need to get done today? I responded to it. Because Susan was unable to deal with my statement. She became openly agitated, which revealed her lack of maturity. During my survey of the area, I became aware of my husband's concerned stare directed at Susan, which portrayed her as the victim. I was at a loss to comprehend how he could consider her to be so naive. There is no way. It would be great if David were more sensitive to the feelings of women. Susan, the girl who is always being deceitful, is in need of a reality check, and I intend to provide her with one. I came at work early the following week, and by the time David finally greeted me, I was already deeply involved in accomplishing my chores. Since he had left his carry-on bag at home, this was the first time he had communicated with me during that period. His demeanor on a Monday morning was met with cold stares from everyone who was present in the office when he entered the building. David, who was apparently taken aback, expressed his surprise. The unfortunate thing is that Susan appeared right behind him, which gave the impression that they were no longer concerned with keeping their relationship a secret. Other people's expressions became even more icy as a result of their presence. When they took their seats, they gave off the impression of unease. Jenny, I hope you haven't been spreading any stories about us. Thank you for your time. That might be considered defamation, Susan observed, attempting to make a caustic remark in my direction during our conversation. It was met with the same amount of sarcasm from me. She moved her attention to other coworkers, including Phil, but everyone avoided her, just as I did. She ignored her attempt to interact more and continued to focus on other people. Additionally, David discovered that he was rejected by everyone. Each and every conversation that they had was solely focused on their work, and they manufactured excuses in order to avoid engaging in idle chatter. Hey, you're not very nice, David said in an attempt to challenge me. What are you talking about? I responded in a truthful manner, refusing to engage in any kind of blame game. He urged, you must have done something. And he was right. Oh. Well, I'm not sure what you mean by that. Why don't you take a moment to examine your own behavior rather than pointing the finger at others? I responded to it. In the end, they experienced such a high level of unease that they hurriedly fled the office as soon as the lunch break started. Immediately following their departure, Phil came over to me while holding a cup of coffee and gave me a subtle nod of acknowledgement of the circumstance. He appeared to be saying, well done, with his expression. I'm sorry about this. I told him that I was sorry. All is well with it. So far, working has not been too difficult for me. This is not the kind of thing that I would let to affect me in any way. You are truly remarkable, Jenny. As Phil laughed, it was obvious that he was happy with my demeanor. After giving their empty desks a fleeting glance, he made the following observation: it's pathetic how they just run away when things get tough instead of facing it head-on. To this I replied, exactly. Thank you, Phil, expressing my appreciation for his support. You're the one who started their rumor, aren't you? David made a remark. I just told that chatty lady that my wonderful coworker Jenny was angry because of David and Susan. Huh? No. I just mentioned that to her, Phil clarified, chuckling at the absurdity of the situation. That she was the one who disseminated it around. We celebrated our hard work by indulging in a luxurious Italian meal at the conclusion of the day. Phil and the chatty lady joined us in toasting our accomplishments. And they laughed like they were partners in crime. Over the course of time, David and Susan gradually earned a lower status within the organization. During the divorce proceedings, I wanted monetary recompense. Despite the fact that the chatty lady's fabricated version of the story circulated across the department, the drama did not end there. At some point, a man who was upset stormed into the company. And it was discovered that he was merely another guy that Susan Woods had been together with. At some point, the confrontation became so intense and intolerable to witness that it eventually reached a stage where the authorities were required to step in and intervene. Susan resigned, as if she were trying to escape the mayhem. And my ex-husband did the same thing because he was unable to survive the scrutiny on his own. To demonstrate his lack of interest in his father, my son chimed in and said, "He is a complete and utter loser and does not deserve your attention, Mom." This was his way of boosting my confidence. I've already returned to my job at the company, and I'm feeling more driven than I did before they left. The atmosphere at work has substantially improved as a result of Phil's continued presence in the office. With the help of my son, I intend to lead a joyful life and provide support to each other. After watching the stories above, do you have any thoughts? Feel free to share your opinions in the comments section. If you enjoyed our video, please like, subscribe, and share our channel. That's all about today's stories. See you next time.